Welcome to our book club today. We are meeting on Thursday as opposed to Tuesday this week, just because we had another class we were taking Tuesday this week, and we will be going over the book, Work the System, 4th edition, chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. Take it away, Mr. David.
Absolutely. So these chapters start to get a little technical. They kind of go into some documents, what they are, what they're kind of used for. So I think for these chapters, I'll kind of go through, so he kind of talks about, action being a builder of confidence. Inaction really is the cause of fear. And so, I mean, this kind of goes back to, some of the books we were reading earlier, especially like Atomic Habits, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And, I think that's something we all already know pretty well. Now, what he does get into is, 3 documents that really kind of help set the tone for your systems in your business, kind of starting off with that strategic objective, which is really just a short document kind of outlining the philosophy and the company, and then, getting into the general operating procedures and principles, which, honestly, once you start getting into this, and the working principles, I think the reason this works is, you and I were kind of just talking about this. A lot of the times when you bring someone on or you get someone to help with your systems, sometimes they're a little timid and they're a little unsure of what's acceptable at our business, the business that you're working at, and how do you go about things. Well, I think these documents are really kind of, a way of really nipping that in the bud. And it's like, okay, sure, I get that there's some uncomfortability in here, but at a bare minimum, let's take a look at these general operating principles. And these are things you keep in mind when you make daily decisions in this business, which to me, I feel like almost kind of takes some of that timidity, I don't know if that's a word, out, so kind of going through these 3 documents, like how do you kind of see these, utilized in your business? And then, what pitfalls are you running into now that you think this could kind of, essentially, get rid of some of those inefficiencies so that you don't see them anymore?
Well, for me, so like as I was reading this or listening to it be read, I think as business owners, we focus so much on the front end of building and creating a business. We focus on 2 things. We focus on, what's our big why? What's our value proposition? Like, why are we doing this? And why should a customer or a client or another human use our services or our practices? And then we just get busy, right? And then you find yourself, and as I say this all the time as I'm coaching agents, we find ourselves being reactive, like he said in the book, putting out fires, because we don't stop on the front end to create what these systems should look like. If you have a strategic objective, then no one in your business has any question as to the purpose of the business and how you're going to get there and why you're going to get there, right? And so that's different than your value proposition. Your value proposition is how do you bring value to that client or consumer that's using you, whereas your strategic objective kind of overlays the business idea and how it's going to come down. And I think that, the biggest thing that it eliminates is extra unneeded hours in your day. When you have, and he kind of touches on this maybe in chapter 5, it's either 5 or 6 that he starts talking on how, he has that epiphany in bed and he's like, okay, well, Centratel is going to die. I've got to do something. So what am I going to do? And he starts realizing that his entire, first 5, 6, 7 years, however long he was in business, was just based on putting out those fires and being reactive. When you have these 3 documents in place, you are being proactive, which then allows you to gain those hours back, because when you're proactive and there's a system in place and you hand that system to someone, if they don't follow it, they're fired. And there's a clear line as to where being fired comes in, right? And so the idea behind all of these, and what I love about all of these, is when you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who has big dreams and goals, your goals and dreams normally don't stop with your business. And he talks about doing this, you know, the three, the strategic objective, the general operating guidelines, and then the working procedures. He talks about doing that in your life and in your business. And I think that I think people that perfect these are the ones that have their business up here that supports their lifestyle, their whatever, but then they go on to do other bigger, greater things, because once they get this in a nice, neat little package and it's ticking on its own, well, you become bored. And so that allows you to, these three steps allow you to have the bandwidth to move into another realm of your life, whether it be, you know, another side hustle in your business, or volunteering somewhere and being, you know, effective in that, or is it traveling? Is it, you know, but it allows space and time for more than one thing. And I think as Americans and as humans, probably just total, we get so bogged down. And then you turn around and you look at your day and you're like, shit, I worked, or shit, I dealt with kids. But there's not, you know, you look backwards and you're like, I didn't really get anything done. These, I think, create a guideline and a roadmap as to what each moment in your day should look like.
Right.
Which then brings you to time blocking, right? Because if you have these systems in place, then you can time block and you know exactly how long it should take you to make buyer calls, seller calls, you know, whatever it looks like. So to me, this gives you back time.
Exactly. And so actually kind of transitioning into chapter 6, where he kind of talks about, you know, essentially kind of managing the systems, you know, and optimizing the systems, you know, that in itself is a whole nother system, you know, and so he actually kind of talks about it. So when he says, you know, kind of taking the most flawed systems first and then moving to the next, so I'm kind of curious to hear, you know, maybe if you had a different thought, but what that says to me, just in my experience, actually kind of, I've helped other companies improve their systems. And so in going through that, the question becomes, well, what's a flawed system and what's most flawed? And so the strategic objective makes it that much more easier, because now you can define what the most flawed system are based on your strategic objective. Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? And what's the biggest system preventing you from getting there? You know, and so from there, you can kind of prioritize your systems. And then he even talks about, you know, critical systems you want to make redundant. And all that really means is, you know, you've got the system so locked down and you've got so many backups on that, you know, should something fail, you've already got something redundant that now kicks over and takes over, and you never have, you know, a lapse in customer experience or whatever it is that's important and critical to your business. You know, so kind of as far as like prioritizing and actually going about it, you know, what did you kind of pick up? And, you know, if you were to kind of, you know, take a stab at it, you know, how would you kind of go about it?
So for me, when he was talking about this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Dave Ramsey attack on debt, kind of snowballing, where you start, you know, Dave Ramsey says, start with your smallest debt, right? Pay it off. And if that debt is $50 a month, well, then when you move to your next smallest debt, if that one's $150 a month, well, then once the smallest is paid off, you've got the 50. So you kind of, and so for me, it was kind of maybe a bit of a reverse definition of that, where you start with your biggest hole in your bucket or your biggest problem. But I think as we go down and as I evaluate, and as you and I work together, and Lisa jumps in and we look at my systems, for me, it's just a matter of finding, you know, to your point, what is our strategic objective? How are we going to get there? Does it coincide with my value proposition, right? Does this strategic objective actually create an end result that focuses on my value proposition? And as we look at all of those things, for me, it's just super eye-opening. Like yesterday, I sat and as I read this and as I see things that don't have systems, even if, and I think he talks about this, and I kind of am jumping ahead, I guess, a little bit in chapter 7, where it doesn't have to be perfect. But yesterday I realized that when I get a meeting with a client, I don't have a system as to what comes next other than we go on a meeting.
Right.
So I stopped in that moment and I created an email that will be attached. Most
Yes.
buyers now want to meet by Zoom first. Whereas a seller, you have to kind of meet face to face because I can't see their whole house. I can't smell their whole house. I can't on Zoom, but with a buyer, I can. So we stopped. We created an email that is going to get attached to every single invitation to that Zoom for our buyer. And if the buyer chooses that they want a face-to-face cup of coffee over that Zoom meeting, then Louis knows. I send him an email. He now puts it on my calendar, and he now gets out this what to expect when kind of email. Because I feel like, if they have that information on the front end, when I get to that meeting and say, hey, listen, like to work with my team and I, and to get all of these things that we promised to bring you that are in our value proposition, you have to sign that contract. Well, a lot of times, that being the first time, especially a first-time home buyer has heard they've got to sign a contract to work with a realtor, well, all of a sudden they start getting nervous. And so as I was creating that system, I thought, okay, how do we eliminate and make it not the first time that they've heard this? And so we just created an email. It's like kind of a step-by-step, 1, 2, 3. Here's what I want you to think about, because a lot of times I get to these meetings and they're like, oh, I want to buy a house, but I don't know what I want to buy, right? And so now when we get to that meeting, they've been prompted, hey, think about what you want in a house. And I give them some things outside of the kitchen. Like, do you want a basement? What do you want to know about the location of your neighborhood and where you are, and that sort of stuff. And so they then get that. They will now get a reminder text and a reminder email, because what Louis knows to set, in that meeting. We then set a text message that goes out on this day. Hey, don't forget, we're super excited about our Zoom call today at 2:30. I'm really looking forward to it. Here's the link. And the nice thing about having systems is technology. And today I can set it and forget it, right? So I put that system in place, then I tell my computer, I tell my system to do it, and it's done. So for us, we are creating systems as we see holes. We've been working for a few years, really. You and I have been working to kind of perfect my systems in my office. So I think a lot of them are kind of already there. But as I move forward and as I read this book, what I'm looking for are, where have I taken for granted that, my gift of gab keeps people locked in? Well, when my gift of gab goes away, the agents on my team may or may not have that. So I need systems in place. Really, right now, the ones that I'm focusing on are the systems that will take my level of care for my clients and make them real, no matter who's working on them, because they still get those personal touches from me.
Right. And actually, one thing that I thought, so you brought up just now, I thought was kind of cool. You related it back to, the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University thing. Yeah. So, and the reason I kind of related to that is because I feel like, so especially within budgeting, it happens a lot with systems. It's almost like, what's the right way to do it? That's hard to answer, because if you think about it, Financial Peace University was the first time somebody told me it doesn't matter which card has the most interest that you should pay off first. It doesn't matter which one you should get rid of first. It's like, take the practicality behind it. You're going to get really excited about paying off something small. So why don't you do that first?
Right. Right.
And sometimes with the systems, it can be just that simple. So one thing you just said, which is something you can put in your general working procedures for all your other folks that come on, let's avoid fires. Let's just find out how to not even get them, So to your point, getting ready for a meeting, what's the system for the meeting? Well, damn, I don't know. But let's just do it now.
Right.
And then let's try and document as much as we can going into chapter 7, getting fit. You got to document it, you got to maintain, and you got to get the team involved.
Right.
And then from there, it's like, now you have the documentation. Now the team's familiar with the documentation. And now you will actually see less fires, because in a sense, you've implemented a system to prevent fires.
Right.
Well,
and to your point, that was another thing I did, I don't think I touched on, is, Louis, here's what we're going to do. go create a page that can now be put in our playbook to where when you are on to bigger or better things, you can do that, or somebody else can do that. Or if you're out sick, you know, he makes a point, again, I don't remember what chapter, but he makes a point that I think it's 6 or 7, everybody in his company, there's a backup for that person's job, including him. So, you know, because that's something that's real, I think, in a lot of our brains and in small businesses. It's like, oh God, what if I get cancer? Oh God, what if I get in a car accident and I'm out of the office for 3 months? I mean, I know when my mom got cancer years ago, her business died because she had great systems, but they all were in her brain, really. The drive was in her brain, and there was really no, you know, she was a very high ISA, an inside sales assistant, and she would pass the business off to other people. And because no one had been taught to be that inside ISA, when she was in the hospital and she was fighting for her life, she was the sole breadwinner. Most of her employees actually left her, you know, or left shortly after she came back. You know, I think some of them felt, she didn't have that many, I think she had 4. I think they felt, you know, responsible to try to stay and keep the doors open. But as soon as she was back, they were all working on commission. And when she as an ISA was not there to bring those dollars in, they started starving. And I don't think any of them were bad people, or do I find fault in them leaving? Absolutely not. But I think, you know, to this book's point, if she would have had a backup person to be that ISA, and then, you know, it's much easier to slide someone in as your phone person, right? You can teach somebody very quickly how to answer a phone and then move everybody else up when and if necessary.
Right. You know, and so that's actually a really good point. That's one thing I don't think anyone really thinks about. So, and there's a simple fix to it. It's called succession planning. It's called succession planning. And I have many clients, I've had to write them up because they didn't have succession planning. It's required. You know, it's almost required because, you know, best example for me, and it's kind of put me in the shittiest situation, and I know how not to get into it anymore. You know, my partner was my dad on a project that I'm still working on. My dad is no longer here. There was no plan for what happened if either one of us, you know, left, got sick, just wasn't available to work for a week. There was none of that there. And now I see, after writing up many of my clients, how important that truly is and why those write-ups come every time. But that's a critical document that could easily just get rid of so much risk. That whole business didn't even have to go under, you know. And so but it's just like it starts with these critical documents: the strategic objective, the general operating principles. And then once you have those together, you can start putting in working procedures. And once again, now you've got your system for preventing fires, you've got backups, you've got all of that. So yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think we kind of went through this relatively quick.
Well, I actually have a question for Alicia, since she is new. Yeah. I do. Since she is new, not necessarily new to real estate, you've been doing it for a little while, you kind of know what you're doing, but she was coming from a different broker that had the systems, right? She came from a broker that plugged her into a system, and she's now since moved over here to EXP because we're just taking over the world one house at a time. And I'm interested to kind of get your viewpoint on these 3 steps in your business, because when you and I coach and we talk, and you know, you get a new client or you're excited and you've got, you know, you've got a new contract you're writing, whatever that looks like. I try, I don't know if I'm perfect at it, but I do try to always remind these people that I'm coaching, like Alicia, like, hey, go home and write a system around this. Hey, you just got your first lead, go home and write a smart campaign around this person's situation, because in a year you may have 7 or 8 or 20 people in this person's situation. So what are these 3 steps: the strategic objective, the general operating guidelines, and the working procedures? What does that feel like for you as a new business owner, and how are you going to implement that? Will this be something that you try to do on the front end instead of like the rest of us? Oh shit, we now have business and no systems, and our money's flying out everywhere, and we know we just made $225,000, $250,000 last year, but I have like $3 in my bank account and I work 90 hours. I don't know why. And all of a sudden you get a system and it's there. So what does that look like or feel like to you as someone who is at the beginning stages of creating what is going to be a powerhouse fucking real estate company?
Bogey. So, yes, I would like to get all of that set up ahead of time. Reading this book has very gently reminded me how important that is, because every day, like, there's a tidbit of like, hey, I don't need to be doing this task. So for me, the most important focus is taking tasks off of me and having someone redundant or something automated to do that for me. I think that's extremely important. In terms of actually getting it done, it's hard for me because, again, the other brokerage just had it all there. And the resources, when you did have a question, were really easy to find. At EXP, I'm still swimming a little bit, trying to figure out where's the right place to go to find that, or who's the right person to ask, and how do I do this, and how do I do that, and what does that even mean? So it would be awesome, I think. And that's one of the things that I would like to work on in the office is having a system, but for now, even just like a group where we could post things to each other. Like, for example, the EXP website that's in each of our names, I found through many steps a YouTube video, and it was awesome. She showed me things that I didn't even know I wanted to do. And so like, I would like to be able to send that to them and be like, hey, I had a ton of questions and this really worked for me. So don't waste your time. Check this out first. But yeah, I think it's all easier said than done. I'm also still trying to figure out time blocking from the last book. I think Christmas was overwhelming for me too. I felt renewed reading this book. I just went back, I started over, and it was like, I heard it completely differently. I think I was just on overwhelm from everyone being home. And there's a little bit of adjustment from his voice, right? When we start a new book and all the voices are different.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he makes a lot of great points, and I wanted to go back to chapters 6 and 7 and take some notes, but I was driving. But yeah, I mean, so far he's made a lot of awesome points. It's the accountability, I guess, is really the word I'm looking for me to actually sit down and do it and get these things accomplished so that I don't have to keep doing them daily or weekly going forward.
Gotcha. I love that, and I'm excited that you're taking everything in. It's hard. No one built Rome in a day, so know that we all are struggling. To your point, if we can absolutely make a Facebook page for collaboration, I haven't, because there's already so many out there. That's really the only. I mean, we have our Fast Forward group, we have our our Kyle Weasel with the Weasel Way group, we have Modern Agent, there's a lot of tools out there. We will be doing some classes. I'd like to do a 30-60-90 class, maybe kind of midsummer. I think a 30-60-90 class, and for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's what are you going to do in your business or your life in the next 30 days, the next 60 days, and the next 90 days. And I think that's super, super helpful when you have a list. You write a list of the next 10 to 15, 20 things that you want to do in your business and or your life. And then you start prioritizing them and giving yourself deadlines as to when they'll be done and how they'll be done. But while you were talking, something else that we can do, just, I know this is not really about the book, it's kind of a sidebar on collaboration, but we can also create a shared Excel file to where when you find a link, you can go in and paste that link, or you find a tool, you can paste that tool and then put a note section on the other side to where it's just like, here's what this was. So if somebody has something, they can go and kind of search within that. I'll get with Louie and see if we can't set this up. So we definitely 1,000% can do that. My goal was just not to create more tools that were maybe unnecessary. However, I do think, a meeting of the group of collaboration would be helpful, because I think, he talks about it in this book, writing your strategic objective and really your value proposition. That's on you as the business owner. Those two things begin and end with you, because no one else understands your value proposition, which is what you share with your consumers, right? It's kind of your strategic objective for your consumers in my head. And then your strategic objective is for the people that are working for you, whether it be a system, a virtual assistant, a part-time assistant, somebody physically in your office, an office manager, another agent underneath you. And it's important that they are on board with kind of writing and helping with the operation and the working procedures, kind of the day-to-day. They're the ones that are going to be using those procedures and that kind of stuff. But I do think that having a group where we met once a week might be beneficial, or maybe bi-weekly might be beneficial. So let me see about getting that on the calendar, maybe on Fridays. I have a team meeting. We do our social media meeting every Friday in my office. So we could probably slide that right in at 9:30, 10 o'clock, if that works for everybody. And I think that would be great. I think that would be a good recruiting tool.
Yeah, I think so. My viewpoint is always like, I know all the resources are out there, but the fact that you have like 4 or 5 of us in one location where we're all pretty much at square one
Right.
was my viewpoint. Like, I know that the people making millions can show us where to find or, teach, but we're all taking baby steps. And so like that was just my thought process.
Yeah, no, I love that thought process. And here's why. So you go to these seminars, you go take all these classes, and it's like one thing from each seminar tends to resonate with you for years. So one of the very first things I learned, I was sitting in a class with a gentleman named Chad Hines. He's a phenomenal KW person. He does a lot of public speaking. He's on a big team. They're amazing. He was over the Southeast when I was there, and I'm not at KW anymore, I don't really know what he does anymore. But he had us all think of a person that we wanted to financially be like, right? And of course, people were writing people down like Oprah Winfrey, Donald Trump, and he said, no, let me stop you there. He said, let me back you up a little bit. So that's where you want to go, but can you talk to that person? And the answer was no. And he said, success is like walking in the snow. You have two choices. You can walk and create your own tracks, or you can find someone else's tracks to walk in. And if you find someone else's tracks to walk in, you're going to get from point A to point B a little faster. But what he said to do was attach yourself to someone who was on trajectory to get to where that Donald Trump money or whatever that goal was, whether it was financial or, a health goal, it doesn't really matter. But what you do is you attach yourself to someone you can actually touch, that's right ahead of you. You follow behind them in the snow in their footsteps. And then when you catch up to them, you find the next person. And a lot of times it'll be that person's mentor, or it could still be that person, right? They get a little bit ahead of you. And so I think, to your point, that might be a good thing to do, is do just a quick 30-minute Zoom call. Nothing crazy long. I don't want it to be hard. But I think that might be super helpful, because I think a lot of your general operating guidelines and your working procedures, they don't change that much from company to company that's under the same umbrella. And I would say even, roping in Dave into those conversations, even what he does, I think parallels what we do. So I think having those conversations, because in the book he says, talk to your staff. Well, y'all don't have a staff. So how do we replace your staff? Right? I have a staff, but it took me 7 years to get a staff, right? And so I think, to your point, I think that's a great idea to replace the staff, right? The other people that you might use to help make those decisions. Let it just be more of a mastermind group.
Right.
And I think that's something Mike and I could easily lead in, 30, maybe 40 minutes, and just see kind of where that goes.
Right.
So,
one thing I wanted to say really quick in closing. So There was something a quote that I mentioned in the last call that we had for the first 4 chapters. I can't remember the exact quote. I was just looking for it, but it was along the lines of, basically you can think of a system as like an assistant or an employee or whatever that says, my job is essentially this one objective or this one goal, and I'm really good at it. So coming into the chapters we just read, that one goal, that one objective that the systems are working for, that starts with your strategic objective. So that is your objective. Every system has an objective. Every control that is tied to a system has an objective. And those objectives all circle back to that strategic objective. This is really why it's a critical document, and he talks about it all through the book. So, but I just wanted to leave that in closing. I mean, really, it starts with that strategic objective. Everything else becomes easier.
Right. Right. Well, this is awesome. I am absolutely loving the book. I was kind of adding up the time. It looks like chapter 9 is 30, chapter 10 is 15, and chapter 11 is almost 50 minutes alone. So do we want to maybe do the end of part 2 with 9, 10, and 11? And then
so yeah, I think so, because once we get into chapter 12, he starts talking. It's a slightly different chapter, different topic. I can relate 9, 10, and 11 together.
Perfect.
So
and then it looks like following that, we probably could break everything else up into maybe 2 or 3 more weeks. Does that work? Perfect. So we'll do chapters 9, 10, and 11 with in the book Work the System, part 2, Make It So. And then Alicia, I'm going to dub you as the next book title. So over the next couple weeks, pick out a book and you will be our leader of conversation, if that is okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Love it. All right. I'll see you guys here next Tuesday. I might be in Louisiana because unfortunately my tenant's not paying her bill and I got to go down there for an eviction.
It is what it is.
So I might be
appraisal too. So
perfect. So I might be catching up with y'all from New Orleans next week, but I will see you guys here on Tuesday next week.